Okay, so it's now time to put everything back together again, those final finishing touches. So I'm going to be going through adding some new fittings to my cabinet. They'll give it a clearer function because it's a drinks cabinet. I'm going to be replacing some old ones, refinishing others. So things like my handles, my hinges, my catches. So I either tidy them up or I make them match the new design better or replace them completely. So before we get going on adding the fittings back that you've had before, you're going to need to clean them at the very least. If you're really lucky and they're in good condition under the grime, they might polish up and work well as they are. So I would say when you're cleaning, go easy at first, just in case they're plated and you sort of scratch that off. You can check whether something's plated, like plated brass, for example, by using a magnet, because solid brass isn't magnetic, but plated brass plate will be. So I use the same little brush that I use for cleaning the furniture itself. I tend to start with a plastic one, just to get into all the sort of nooks and crannies. You could use a plastic dish scourer. I quite like these heavy duty ones because they give quite a good scrub. Or a fine wire wool. I also use a product called Barkeeper's Friend to do the clean, which is a bit more abrasive and it's got an oxidising action. It's actually really useful for lightening stains in wood, so it's a great staple to have in, and it's only a few quid from sort of the pound shops. So I put the powder into a little container with a bit of water, and then I make a paste and I scrub the hardware with it. Now, some people boil up their hardware in vinegar and hot water, which can help loosen the dirt a bit more. But the problem with that is it makes brass go pink because it reacts with the zinc and it brings out the copper in the metal. So this can sometimes be rescued with wire wool, but I generally think it's kind of a bit risky, so I would avoid boiling brass coloured fittings. If they come up nicely after my cleaning, then I'll use brasso and silver just to get them to really, shine brilliantly. If you filled your original holes to fit new handles, you can measure and drill new holes at this point. Now, you could choose to put your holes in before you do your design, but I find that I want to often decide the placement in relation to the design and how it ends up. So maybe centrally or a bit higher visually looks good. I'll tend to sort of put them in at the end. They also have just a single screw like the original handles, which means they're really easy for me to fit to. When I'm drilling, I use a little bit of low tack masking tape on the front to mark my drilling position. So I'll put a little bit of frog tape on the front. So, mark it in position, obviously measuring very precisely where I'm going to be drilling. And then on the back, I'll also put some tape too to prevent that splitting as it comes through. And I'll always go front through to back because this is obviously my more precious surface here that I don't want to mess up. So I'll put the drill through this side. And I'll try and feel for the tip of it just starting to come through gently. And if you want to, you can actually then put the tip of the drill bit back in that hole and go the other way, so you don't end up having to force your way through. Drilling onto a flat surface or another piece of wood is generally a good idea, because then you don't end up with it sort of pushing through and splintering. Same if I'm doing a hole at the back of a piece of furniture. So I've got a hole up in the top right hand corner there. The back of a piece of furniture like this, the ply can be quite brittle. So what I'll do is I'll put my masking tape there, but I might actually put a more heavy duty one on the outside so that it stops the ply splintering. And again, do that same technique, sort of hopefully get it part way through till I know where it is, and then drill back the other way so that you can end up with a much cleaner hole. And all you need to do really is to check your drill bit with the size of your screw to make sure you've picked the right size. So once I've drilled my hole here, I can then fit my handle like so. Now mine have got silver screws. I could replace these with gold, which would be more in keeping with the design, because you can actually buy these screws. And I have a collection, so I could just replace them. But, so just pop that through, put my little, oops, and then I will hold it tight. On this side, I'll hold the handle, get my screwdriver, and then just tighten that up there. Now, I'm lucky because this piece came with little domes of silence, or bolt covers really, which I have actually refinished in black as well. So these have little prongs, you may have seen these, and they can actually go straight back in the holes that were there before. And then the best thing to do is probably put a little bit of cloth between the paintwork and your hammer to hammer that back into place. If you find any of the prongs are a little bit bent, so it doesn't go straight back in, you can get a small pair of pliers like this and just bend them back into place so that they are straight again. And then that pops back in there and just makes the inside look nice and tidy. So I'll do that properly in a moment. So you can see that one's nice and finished on the inside here. Okay, so let's start putting everything back together again. Very exciting. So for mine, actually, one thing I didn't mention was I've actually replaced my hinges completely with black ones. The originals I did refinish in gold with the spray, which came up okay, but I didn't really think the tone worked with the design. So I've actually gone ahead and replaced them, and I'll use these on something else instead. These new hinges were just a little bit longer though. New hinges are a bit more low profile than vintage hinges in terms of depth, so they wouldn't need such a big hole as this if it was cut for the original, for the size of this. So I have had to make it a little bit longer here and here by just chiselling a little bit extra out to fit it in. And you also see the hinge pops in because it is smaller profile than the vintage one. You can see it there. So I've had to take advantage of a little cabinet maker's trick. If anybody's ever taken a piece of furniture apart, you will know, you'll often see a little slip of card inside the hinges, and what that does is just helps push the hinge up a little bit. So inside here there's a little piece of card, and then I'll put a piece of card underneath the, if I could get that out, that'd be great. I'll put a little piece of a slip of card there underneath it as I go to screw it in. So let's do that. And so for this I'm using crosshead screws. I actually replace all my vintage screws from the very start of the project. They never get used again. The doors have to come on and off several times through the process of laying out the design, of top coating. And so for me, it's just too much hassle and hard work to be trying to get flathead screws on and off, because they are really hard work. Call it progress. I think these are better. I know they're not original. A little bit fiddly, but I would suggest, if you can save the existing hinges, that's the preferred option, because it can throw the whole balance of the piece out by playing around with the hinges. And I've got to a point now I'm kind of all right with it, but they can be challenging. So I would say don't replace them unless you really have to. Get the top one in. If you do find you've got a little bit of sag down with your doors, it's quite a good tip to also put a slightly longer screw in the very top hole. As a rule of thumb, the long screws are the ones that attach the door and the hinge together, and the shorter screws are the ones that go into the cabinet. And you can also test the depth here to make sure you're not going in with too long a screw. But generally, I will use a 16mm screw for taking the hinge into the door, so attaching it to the door, and probably a 12mm screw for attaching it to the cabinet, unless it needs something a little bit longer, and it can take it because it's got a solid enough frame to drill into. So that's my rule of thumb. You'll find the sizes of screws vary a little bit, so if you want to replace yours as well. And generally the hole in the hardware is going to dictate the size of the head of the screw rather than the length of the screw. So I find I have a range of screws between 2.5, 3 and 3.5 as a head size, and I typically use this brand called Spax. You should find this in most DIY shops, but they're nice because they're actually gold coloured, and so they look a lot smarter. Not everybody's wants to be replacing screws, but I do think for practicality's sake, and they do look nice when they're finished, so let's get this one in. Just a little fiddly getting the paper on the end of the screw. That's why electric screwdrivers are invaluable. So I've also, as you saw, refinished the, this is the bolt that holds the door in position at the bottom, so that goes there. And then I've got a catch, a thumb catch, which goes here. I've already got the stay in place, so that's the metal stay that has been sprayed as well, that's already in there. It's a bit harder to get in to do that. So all I need to do is pop these back in. A slightly bigger screw here because the holes are a bit bigger. So that's a size 3 head, I think. So you could measure the top of your vintage screws if you need to try and match them up and just buy the exact right size. Let's just make sure I put it the right way around. Just line that up first, actually. It's not quite lined up. And the hole. Okay. And then 2 tiny little, I think these are 10mm long, so they're just tiny little screws. So you don't have as much use for, but they sometimes are needed for things like this that need a tiny screw. The catch is already in place, the spring-loaded catch here is already in place. That I did refinish, but as the doors came together it started to take the paint off. So I've actually taken that back to the gold. I may even replace this fully because the spring isn't quite working and I'm not quite happy with it. But I can't find the exact replacement. It's going to mean cutting a slightly different hole. I've got a lot of depth here, but it might be a different catch plate. It hits the plate on the opposite side like so, a strike plate there. So I may have to look at changing that if that doesn't look like it's going to stand the test of time. I need to make sure that it's not going to stop working for my customers. So those go together like so. This one locks, and then you can bolt it like so. Into place. There we go. Looking good. Let's get the drawers in. That was the one of the racks, which I'll show you in a second. Other finishing touches. There we go. So let's have a look at the interior now. So as you heard before, we've got some racks to go inside. So I've got a glass hanging rack. So this is a nice one because it's got 3 separate racks in one, but in one frame. And I like it obviously because it's already in black rather than have to spray it. Sometimes when I put in the other type of racks, the single racks, I do have to spray them, again with the hard wearing outdoor or exterior spray paint because we don't want them obviously to flake off. There's some lovely decorative spray paints out there, but I just don't think they're hard wearing enough for your fixtures and fittings. and you don't really want stuff to start chipping off. So this is already black, which is fab. Now this needs some quite chunky screws, so the holes sort of again give you the idea, but also it's got to take a bit of weight. So this has got a size 3.5 head screw, so it's a bit bigger. Not very long though, it's 12 millimeters, because you need to be really careful when you're drilling up into the top of your furniture. As you can see here, it looks quite thick, but appearances are deceptive, because actually it goes up by another inch, and the top, maybe more actually, the top is actually quite thin. So you've got to be really careful. And one thing you can do is you could put another layer of wood, which you can paint and attach and just glue inside, and use that to screw into to give you a greater depth if you know the top is quite thin. It's a little bit of something you've got to just go steady with and just check. What you can do, and I definitely suggest you never use the screws that come with them, is use the same sort of screws that I've been talking about for the hinges, and these are self-tapping screws, so they have little tiny points, and so you can feel for that coming through very slowly, and you'll feel it starting to part the fibre of the wood. And the great thing about wood is, if it starts to do that, you can push it back down and you know, make it relax back into place, and maybe do a little tiny touch-up if you need to, but you can go very carefully with these and not cause a great amount of damage. You can sort of get a feel for it, and generally about 12 millimeters is about right. So generally have to use a drill for this, because it needs quite a long, or a manual screwdriver, needs quite a long shaft there to be able to get up in between these hanging sections. So normally, a good idea to do is to install this while the piece is upside down, or even on its back. But I'm going to do it while it's upright. Just literally screwing straight in, because self-tapping means that the screws will basically drill themselves into place. So you don't need to drill pilot holes, which is great. So. Okay, that's in. I've got mine over to one side so that the glasses sort of use up this space, and then I'm going to have bottles on this side, and there's plenty of room underneath for upright bottles. You can actually choose to put them where you like, really, but I quite like them with the glasses facing towards me rather than going across that. Personal choice. So I've also got these lovely metal, black metal wine racks, which are freestanding. And they just fit and stand inside like this, so it gives you a bit of flexibility about where they go, to be honest. You could install something that's fitted down the side and screwed into the side. Again, you've got to be careful with the thickness of the walls of the cabinet, and you might want to sort of put a piece of wood on the side if they are particularly thin. Just glue it in, weight it down when it's on its side, and then you've got more to drill into to actually take the weight of the bottles. But I've gone for this option because of the construction of mine, really. I thought that would look better. And you could move them around, you could put them in the drawers, you could do all sorts with them. As you'll see, I've already installed the back of my cabinet. I've actually put in a mosaic back in this piece, so it's having a little bit of fun with something that will coordinate with the disco theme, and I've put in iridescent reflective tiles. Normally I'd put a piece of mirror in, because I think that's quite fitting for a drinks cabinet, and they're fairly cost effective and really easy to fit with like a contact adhesive. The only tip to say, if you are installing something like that, is just to make sure, if you're also putting a light in, that you just leave yourself a little bit of a space across the top for the hole where you've drilled for your lights. If you're putting lights in, like battery operated lights, that you're sticking in inside and you're not putting a wire through to the back, perfect, that's much easier. Other options, you could paint this section in metallic, that could look quite fun. Or you could wallpaper, you could decoupage the interior to make it look rather exciting. So yeah, that's just added a little bit of extra interest to the inside. I've also top coated the sides and the base just so that they stand up the wear and tear it's going to get internally. Of course, the backs of the doors have been top coated too, so that should stand up to plenty of party. Final touch to put in is the light. So here it is. This is an LED strip inside here, and I've actually also sprayed the housing that it's sitting in, which helps it look very discreet inside and makes it quite invisible. There's the actual connector. There's a motion sensor just here, which has got two little tiny screws holding it up to the top. So it's actually screwed into the top here, and the connector is just hidden there. So I just need to plug that in and then fit this into its clips and ready to go. We can just plug it in now. The wire comes out the back here through the hole that I've drilled. You just connect that up. And plug it in. And because it's a motion sensor, when I close the doors, after a time, the light will go off and come on again when you open the doors. If you want to know more detail about creating lights for furniture and covering all different kinds of lights, smart lights, actually replacing and updating vintage lighting, not just installing lighting, have a look at my Lighting for Vintage Furniture masterclass and find out more about the techniques that I use to fit lights into different kinds of furniture. So, just before it actually is ready to go and party, there are a couple of things that just need tidying up before we're finished. First of all, I always oil, first of all clean and oil the drawers and any insides of any cabinets that I haven't refinished will just get tidied up and refreshed ready before it goes off to its new home. So I will take the drawer out. If there's any sort of discoloration on the actual wood, I'll get the sander on it and just refresh it and then give it a coat of oil such as hemp oil or orange oils, very simple oil, not a drying oil, that will just nourish and make it just look nice and fresh on the inside of the areas. I don't necessarily do inside of here. I wouldn't necessarily do that, but I may do along the runners. It's a really personal choice, but anything that just looks a bit dusty and a bit aged, you can do with a little coat of oil. And then the final bit is the back. So the back of the furniture, generally, I like to oil it if it's in really fresh condition, and then that just makes it look a bit tidier. But if it's a bit discoloured and a bit stained, I will look at using a water-based wood stain just to darken it down a bit, because the backs of furniture, it just often shows the history of the piece, and I just think to completely cover a piece with paint is a little bit sacrilegious because we sort of lose the vintage inside the paint. And the backs and the insides were never meant to be seen, they were never finished properly, so follow the finish that was there originally. So if I use a stain, I might use like a dark brown. On a piece like this I could use a black, like an ebony stain. It allows the wood to still show through. But there are times you just need to paint because you've maybe filled some holes, you've got some damage on it, and so a coat of paint. But you don't need to go to like 3 coats, maybe a couple of coats is all you need just to finish it off and make it look finished. It's personal choice. People have different ways of doing it, so you obviously decide what suits you. If the back's really bad, you can actually buy new ply and fit that instead. It's really easy to do, and it might be an easier way to work with your particular piece of furniture. Sometimes, some pieces, it's easier to decoupage, it's easy to get in and do the painting if you take the back off. So certainly at the very beginning of the process, if you can get your back off your furniture, which is not the sort of case with mine, then you're going to find it's an awful lot easier to work with. But anyway, right, so I think I'm finished. All I need to do now is actually style it up, get the photographs taken and get it listed. Or if it's for your own home, obviously you would want to put it into place and get your knickknacks out. So I'm going to just pop a little bit of something on top just to set the scene. What else? Ready for a party. So hopefully you've enjoyed this course. I hope it has been useful. I hope you'll continue to use it. It's here for you forever, for you to access and to use. And I can't wait to see some of the work you've created. Please come into the group, share your finished pieces, tag me in at Done Up North on Instagram and Facebook, and I would love to reshare your work. We are at the end.